What is happening, y'all? Cowboy here, and today we're going to be looking at the top 10 PvP spells in Elden Ring. So these are spells that are excellent in player versus player situations, whether because of their effects or their tracking or their ability to nullify other spells. So we have a mix of both sorceries and incantations, in particular 4 sorceries that I'll be calling attention to and 6 incantations. We're going to be talking about how effective the spell is, how you should be using it in PvP, and also covering counters to these spells as well. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So our first spell is Stars of Ruin. Now this is definitely one of the more expensive options at 50 FP, but this spell offers some of the best tracking in the game. It's a fantastic spell to chase down players when they're attempting to run away, still getting in hits, but this is not without its faults. A more experienced player can dodge this. In particular, running right through it with a couple dodge rolls is usually going to be your best bet. You can see there how with 2 rolls, Tox ended up only taking 92 damage versus around 300-400. Beyond that, this can also be countered out by things like spell parry shields. So if Tox were to pull out a shield and counter, you can see I'm going to end up getting hit in the face pretty hard by that. So definitely be cautious in your use of this. Moving on to our second option, ADULA'S Moonblade. Now this is particularly useful because of the multi-hit nature. You have both a blade that comes out as well as a blast that's on it, and you can see there that resulted in 2 hits. In particular, the range on this is quite deceptive. A lot of people will see a sword, and even though it's from all the way back here, that beam will still connect, and then on top of that, this is building up frostbite damage. Now the easy counter to this is, like with all sword spells, simply rolling through it. You want to roll when the sword is coming out, and in general, you can avoid this spell. Moving on to our third spell, we have Collapsing Stars. Now, Collapsing Stars is more of a utility. It does do decent damage, but the big benefit is you can see it'll yank the player towards you. And this obviously has a lot of synergy with spell setups. It has synergy if you're playing with other friends, because the idea is you force somebody out of their position. And positioning is one of the most important things in PvP. So taking another player and yanking them on back towards you when they're trying to run away it's basically devastating. Obviously, with most spells though, this one also can be rolled through if you time it right and roll directly into it or directly to the side. Our next spell is going to be Eternal Darkness. Now this is a defensive utility style spell, and what it's going to do is create a black hole that floats above you, sucking in various sorceries and incantations. Now this is not a catch-all, it's not going to vacuum up everything, but it will vacuum up quite a few spells. In particular, spells that track, things like Stars of Ruin, things like PEST threads. So real fast, just to show this, it can actually vacuum up the counter bolt on that shield that counter spells. So for example, if I toss this up and then I toss Stars of Ruin out to try and get some damage and a player counters, you can see how that got sucked right on up into the hole. So to be honest, there's really no counter to this. As a player, you want to stay near it because it is an area of effect. So if I put that up and then I decide to run over here, it's not going to vacuum that far, just to show that in training. So as you can see, moving away from the black hole is not going to help you out. But this one also has some applications in PvE. You can use this to vacuum up spells of your opponents in areas that are particularly annoying. Our next spell is Bestial Sling, and you're going to see this one a lot, especially from melee players, because it's very fast, it's very low cost. You can cast it while you're jumping, you can cast it out of a roll, you can cast it while you're running, you can cast it after swinging your weapon. And this one's really useful, to be honest. There's not any one particular counter to this just because of how fast it comes out. And in particular, this is generally used in conjunction with other things. So the idea is you're playing with a sword, for example. You run up, they dodge the sword swing, and then the Bestial Sling comes out. As with everything, you can potentially roll through it, but it comes out very fast and it can be chained. So this is definitely one that is excellent for more melee-oriented builds due to the low requirements on it. And it's something you should just be aware of that most melee builds may have sitting in their back pocket. Next up, we have PEST threads. Now, PEST threads has some of the best tracking in the game. It will loop on in, and as you can see, even a player moving to the side or, potentially going in a roll, this is going to hit very hard. Now, PEST threads has a very tricky tracking box. If you roll a little bit too early, it'll actually loop back around and still potentially come after you. So the best way to avoid something like this is either counter it with a spell parry or roll directly through it right before it's about to hit. You can see, and even right there, even though Tux rolled, the PEST, they tried to come after him and hit there from behind. So definitely a very useful spell to track in PvP. I will say the range on this one isn't quite that long, so if Tox is just a little bit farther, you can see the threads are just going to end up falling short. So keep that in mind if you're using this. So the next spell we're going to be talking about is Frenzied Burst. And what's so nice about this is it's essentially a long-range snipe. You can see how far away we're hitting Tox from, and we have very solid damage on this. This isn't even a dedicated int build, but the other thing is this is going to be excellent at building up frenzy on your target. So a couple of these and you can very easily cause madness to proc. From that point, the target ends up being locked in place. They take FP loss, and this is really great at catching runners. So if I'm chasing somebody around in PvP and they start running away and they don't see it coming, this will very easily pop somebody from behind. So it's a good chase down tool. It's a good tool in invasions or co-op to hit hosts when they're unaware. But as with anything that's a projectile, this doesn't have great tracking. So when it comes on out, you can easily just sidestep it, or you can roll through it. And it's definitely something you want to be aware of. You can't actually, spam this. You need to be very tactical about how you're going to use this one, but catching a player that is unaware with it, or a player that's running, and it is some very solid damage. The next up on our list is EKZYKES'S DECAY, or alternatively the weaker version, the Dragon Rot Breath. This is an incredibly potent spell that you'll see a lot in PvP. You can basically hold this on down to dump out a huge amount of your bar, and you can see on top of the damage being extremely high, it of course inflicts rot on the target. Now, one of the best things about the EKZYKES'S DECAY option is this one can be cast while jumping, whereas the regular one cannot. So if you're going to use this, I'd highly suggest the upgraded version. In particular, if your seal is in your right hand, you can still hold it and cast it in the air. You can't hold it and cast it in the air if the seal is in the left hand, so that's something to keep in mind. But you can jump up and then cast this just to give yourself a little bit of height and really spam that from above. All in all, this is a fantastic spell, and the only real counter to this is going to be running away. Basically, as soon as you see that dragon coming out, you just want to haul ass in the opposite direction as fast as you can, because there's really no easy way. Alternatively, you might be able to run up and get on the target, but to do that, you'd already have to be pretty close, and you'd have to get in there as soon as that dragon animation starts, because otherwise you're going to get caught in the face, and you're going to take a lot of damage to it. Of course, because that is so prominent in PvP, I'd suggest carrying around the boluses that you can use to neutralize rot. Those are definitely going to be helpful. Alternatively, Flame Cleanse Me can at least remove the debuff effect, but it's not going to save you from the massive damage potential of the spell. The next spell on our list, and one of my personal favorites, is PLACIDUSAX'S Ruin. Now this is going to start with an initial lightning explosion, and after that you're going to sweep out with 3 beams. Each of these beams can do pretty high damage to the target, but the final beam is going to be an upward swipe that in general will track in and is usually really good at hitting the target. Now, obviously the beams can be dodged with a little bit of proper timing and rolling, but the real strength of this spell is the fact that not only can it be cast in midair, but the lightning explosion is instantaneous. So for a caster, if somebody's trying to rush you down, you can jump up in the air and throw out that lightning explosion. And at that point, most players are going to start panic rolling away from the dragon. Now, like I said, that final swipe is usually what you're going to hit. And the best way to avoid this, there are 2 in particular. When you see those beams coming out, for the sideways beams, I suggest rolling either forward or back. For the beam that's going to target straight at you, that 3rd beam, you want to roll off to the side. The other option, of course, is after the lightning explosion comes out, a player could potentially run on in and get to you and damage you while you're locked in this animation. So that's definitely something to be aware of. As you can see, Tox just using fists there to punch me. But it is still a spell that you should be aware of on the battlefield, because having a lightning explosion come out instantaneously from mid-air for well over 700 damage on a leveled up Faith build is definitely something that you should look out for. Now our last and final spell is going to be Wrath of Gold, and this is a very fast option that'll come out. And one of the nice things is it does have a bit of a knockback as well, so you can use that to blast players off cliffs. If you're fighting in areas like Stormvale along the scaffolding, it's very easy to get a gravity-oriented kill. Now this is one of the faster AoE options available as a spell. As you saw right there, it comes out very fast, and the range on it is pretty deceptive. Players are going to have to be close. From about here, the charged version may hit him, but a regular version would not. As you can see, about the same distance there, and it's just barely falling short. Now, the great thing about this is the timing, because players don't know, if you're spamming a fast one and then they think you're going to do another one and they try to roll in, and then the charged one comes out, you're going to end up hitting them even harder. But you can roll through this, just make sure you're waiting for when you see the animation is about to go off. All in all though, definitely a very solid spell, and the AoE potential makes it a great tool when you're fighting multiple opponents. Now, before we want to wrap up, I also want to talk about two generalist options that are really good to counter a lot of things in PvP. And while they're not going to counter everything, they are useful to have for PvP in general. The first is going to be a shield with carry and retaliation. Now, it doesn't matter if you're using a buckler or a small shield or a medium shield, that's going to be preference. But carry and retaliation is great in that it's a spell parry that'll also summon swords above your head that can then attack the target. You can even use this to counter out things like the moonblade spam and pretty much any projectile that's going to come your way. The second, and this is pretty much exclusive to strength style builds, but the Erd Tree Great Shield. This is the same Great Shield used by the Tree Sentinel at the start, and using the special art is going to create a seal around the shield that will then counter spells and reflect a blast back towards the target. Both of these are, of course, very, very strong options for any PvP build that is looking to counter out mages, but just keep in mind that one of them has a pretty significant investment in strength. So that's going to wrap things up for this video. Obviously, these aren't the only spells useful in PvP, and you're free to explore and try out other combinations yourself and find different spells that connect. But in my experience and the experience of other folks I talked to that do a lot of PvP in particular, these 10 spells seem to be some of the staples that we're seeing a lot of that tend to be more effective than their counterparts. So that's going to wrap things up for me. Let me know what y'all think down in the comments below, and I'll catch y'all next time.